Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. For the past 3 weeks, Algeria has been rocked by mass protests that harken to the Arab Spring. The protests were triggered by the decision of longtime ruler Abdelaziz Bouteflika to run for another term in office in elections scheduled for April. Bouteflika came to power in 1999 as the architect of a peace accord that ended Algeria's brutal civil war that killed as many as 200,000 people in the 1990s. But Bouteflika is now 82 years old and has not been seen in public since suffering a stroke over 5 years ago. His decision to stand for elections, or probably more accurately, the decision of those around him to have him stand for elections, is being widely rejected by these protesters. Also fueling the protests is Algeria's languishing economy and a looming fiscal crisis propelled by falling prices of oil and natural gas. On the line with me to discuss this unfolding situation in Algeria is Dr. Dalia Ghanem, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, which is where I caught up with her. We kick off with a basic question on the mind of many Algerians: where is President Bouteflika? We then discuss the politics of who is running the country while Bouteflika is possibly incapacitated. We have a longer conversation about what is driving these protests and where these protests may be headed. I think you all find this a very useful conversation for understanding events as they unfold in Algeria over the coming weeks and months. One quick announcement before we begin: I will be in Oxford in mid-April participating in the Skoll World Forum. This is a major conference around social entrepreneurship, around which I'll be doing some interviews. I suspect some of you who are listening to the show will also be at the Skoll World Forum, so please come say hello. I also know that I have listeners in general around Oxford, so reach out. I would love to meet up. I always love meeting listeners in person. You can reach out to me using the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com, or just hit me up on Twitter at Mark L. Goldberg. All right, now here is my conversation with Dr. Dalia Ghanem.
The French channel Canal Plus revealed the information. He is in a hospital in Geneva at the 8th floor of the CHU in Geneva. The reporter who was doing the report even met his brother, Nasser Bouteflika, in the 8th floor. So we do know where is he. We don't know in which state, but we can easily guess.
So, if he is incapacitated, if he is out of the country in Europe, who's running the country?
Well, it is the same people who has been running the country since President Bouteflika has been, hit by a stroke in 2013 and has been since then, in if I may say, a debilitated state of long-standing illness. He's been unable to walk, unable to address his people for 6 years. And for all these years, it's been his brothers, his clan, but also, the different circles that compose the Algerian regime.
And what are some of the individuals in this that are perhaps the most influential? And if he really is incapacitated, as he seems to be, and is unable to run the affairs of state, it's basically you have these competing power centers that are choosing the direction of the state.
That's true. I think the most, at least the person that we've been hearing a lot about is his brother, Said Bouteflika. But, again, the circles that compose the Algerian regime that is highly complex and opaque are several and numerous. So it is circles of state bureaucrats, business leaders, and of course, political military elites. The thing is that all these circles are often connected by family, tribal, or regional ties, but they all have closely knitted connection and interdependence between the country's military elite, business elite, the Bouteflika clan, and so on and so forth. And of course, these relationships are not written in stone, and allegiances are fluid. But grosso modo, if I may say, these are all the circles and the competing circles that are composing the Algerian regime.
So can we just kind of go back a little bit, and can you explain who is Bouteflika? How did he come to power? Like, what do we need to know about him in this moment?
Well, Bouteflika came in power in 1999. Before that, he was exiled. He was exiled actually in Switzerland, so he has a long story with this country. Bouteflika is very well known for being the youngest Algerian minister in the history of Algeria. He was close to Houari Boumediene. When he came back from his traversée du désert, as we say in French, in 1999, he became president of Algeria. He is seen as being the architect of the peace in Algeria. You do know that Algeria has been severely hit by a civil war between 1991 and 2002, and it is believed that Bouteflika was the architect of peace, while it is true and not, because actually President Zerwel before him initiated, reconciliation and peace process. But he's been also known for rehabilitating Algeria on the international scene. So the image of the president was until recently pretty good. And as a matter of fact, it's very important to note that, I was in Algeria a few days ago. I actually flew back to Beirut yesterday, and I participated to the demonstration myself. As an observer, because I am a scholar, but also as a participant because I am an Algerian citizen. And it was very enlightening to see that Algerians are very, grateful, if I may say, and cognizant about the achievements of President Bouteflika. They would tell you, yes, he brought back peace. Yes, he brought back Algeria on the international scene, but yet he brought also his clan, his supporters, and they've been robbing the country for 20 years. But, most of the time, Algerian will tell you, sorry, we are not against the man. We are against all what is around the man and the system. They would tell you that President Bouteflika is very sick. He is probably not aware of what's going on around him, and they should just let him go. Unfortunately, this entire, situation has sullied, if I may say, the image of President Bouteflika. And most of the time, Algerian would tell you, c'est dommage. In the sense, it's a pity that he didn't know where to stop. Especially that, he was the president that said once in a very famous speech when he was still very healthy, he said, we are the generation of 1962, Tab Jinenna in Arabic, which can be translated by, our time is over. And he said, my time is over, and this is the time for youth to take back power. So he gave a lot of hope to Algeria Algerian, and yet he is the president that has been there for 20 years, clinging to power despite a very, very poor health. So this has been, a very disappointing point for millions of Algerians who want their dignity back.
So you were in Algeria, you were participating in these protests. Can you explain who are the protesters? Is there any sort of central direction of the protesters? What is the demographics of the protest movement? How widespread is it? And does it have any sort of institutional support from, key players in Algerian politics?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, I was really impressed. I marched first with the student in the University of Ben Aknoun in Algiers on February 26th. And those were all very young students, 21, 22. They didn't witness the Arab Spring. They didn't, I reformulate. They didn't witness the Black Decade, yet they were very aware of the dangers of violence because the collective memory of the civil war is still present because their parents told them about the civil war and because they know what we've been through in the 90s. And then on March 1st, the demographic was very interesting. I saw people from all ages, from all generations, and from all social classes. I've seen, people who were in their 20s, people in their 30s, in their 40s. I myself marched with my mother, with my sister-in-law, with my cousins. I saw elderly people, senior people in wheelchairs. I saw family with their kids holding their kids on their shoulders. I saw students, unemployed, lawyers, doctors, retired. And that is the entire Algerian population. I think it is very representative. When it comes to organization, there is no leader behind these demonstrations. They are really spontaneous, and the call has been, made on Facebook. Facebook is really used in Algeria. It is not Twitter. It is Facebook, and the call has been made on Facebook. It is very spontaneous, non-organized. There is no leader behind them, and I think this is what makes, for the moment, the strength of this mobilization. I do believe that the mobilization can turn into a successful social movement if the purpose and the objective of the demonstration remain the same, meaning getting rid of President Bouteflika and his supporters. And two, if the demonstration remain as peaceful as what I saw, then they will be able, to convince more people to join and to convince those who are already there to stay behind the movement. Any violence might alienate people participating and those who still have to be convinced.
So if Bouteflika's name was removed from the ballot, then you would consider the protest movement a success?
I think it will be a big success for Algerians. This is the call of people who has been, silent for a while. And again, they want their dignity back. I think this is the slap that they won't accept. This is a humiliation for them, being run, as they say it, in a very humoristic way, for which Algerians are very known. We don't want to be governed by a frame. The frame is the reference of this, portrait of Bouteflika, who has been carried out by his supporters for events in which he couldn't actually participate in person.
So they hold a picture of him and instead of him in person. So they call him like the president by frame.
And that's quite crazy. That's absurd. Mm-hmm. And, at the beginning, Algerians were laughing about it, and they were, But today I felt the anger, I felt the shame. Some of them told me, we feel ashamed now to say we are Algerian because we are mocked by everybody, including our neighbors and friends. And this is unacceptable. In a country where 55% of the population is under age 35, being run by a president who is 82 and who is terribly sick and cannot talk and walk and who hasn't been able to address his people for 6 years is a shame.
So a lot of the analysis that I've read about Bouteflika and the situation, and I'm wondering if you agree, seem to suggest that part of the reason he was able to survive for so long as an effective political leader, and part of the reason that Algeria was able to avoid a lot of the Arab Spring protests in 2011 was that he was able to direct state resources towards individuals and towards sectors of society in order to placate them. And he was able to do so while the price of hydrocarbons and the price of oil and natural gas was high. So the state coffers were full. But ever since 2014, when natural gas and oil prices slid, his ability to buy off the opposition and to placate individuals has been stymied. And so Algeria has stumbled into this economic crisis and this economic malaise, which is sort of propelling and inspiring the protests as well. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the relationship between Algeria's economy and the protests.
Well, that's true. It is true. And I explain it in my study published for the Carnegie Middle East Center called Limiting Change Through Change, in which I explain what are the secrets behind the longevity of the Algerian regime. And I explain it that if this regime has been able to survive since 1962, it is because of its capacity to adapt. It created self-adaptation mechanism. So this is what it did in the 90s. And then after the 90s, we had the riots of 2001. And then we had the Arab Spring. And we had the drop in oil prices. And each time what the Algerian regime did is in important and delicate the moment of instability, the Algerian regime disseminated, if I may say, resources. These resources appeared sometimes in the form of political resources, such as the reforms that have been offered to the people in 2012, or in form of economic resources, as it was the case in 2012 onwards, when the regime was able, through its connection, its patrons, and its clientelist, if I may say, network, buy social peace. But today, it is no longer possible to do that. We are no longer in 2012 when Algeria had sizable foreign exchange reserves. Back then, Algeria ranked 8th in the world. Since mid-2014, there has been a drop in oil prices, as you said, and foreign exchanges reserve shrank dramatically. And they went from $194 billion in 2013 to $96 billion in 2019. The stabilization fund has been consumed, and the economic growth, that was actually in 2014 already, low, standing at something around 3.8%, is now at 2.3%. Add to that the budget deficit is at 9% of GDP, and the state is actually heavily in debt, with an internal debt of the Algerian treasury that went from 8% in 2015 to 48% in 2017. And finally, there is the problem of the inflation that reached 5%. So with which money they are going to buy social peace? This is no longer possible today. So the only possible thing that they might do is disseminate again political resources. But again, we saw it yesterday with the move that they had with Abdelaziz Bouteflika coming and saying that if President Bouteflika is re-elected, he is going to call for anticipated elections in 1 year and he will step down. It is as if almost they are begging the people to let them stay in power. And this is what has been outrageous for the Algerians.
So finally, can you tell me what indicators or events or moves will you be looking forward to, or will you be looking to in the coming, days and weeks and months that will suggest to you how this sort of moment in Algerian history will play out, and whether or not the protests will be successful, whether or not there may be violence? Are there any indicators or events or anything else that will suggest to you how this will shake out over the next weeks and months?
Well, first of all, the first move is for me to go back to Algiers. As I told you, I came back yesterday, but I am going to leave Beirut during the weekend because I need to be there, to observe. But also, it's very important for me as an Algerian to leave that moment. I will look at the demonstrations first. I really want to see whether the Algerian demonstrators are going to be able to keep up with their peaceful, the peaceful nature of their protests. And I believe that this will be the case. I am afraid, though, of the violence that might come from the security forces. Videos showed, and even I assisted to an event during the March 1st in which it was some of the police. I insist on some of the police because the majority were very peaceful. Some even cried. So some of the policemen present were, teasing, if I may say, the protest, and they were trying to get reaction from them. So the first is the reaction of the security forces. The second is to observe the reaction of the état-major, the military. The military has been very silent for the moment, and we don't know what is their move. So I will be looking at that. And of course, it goes without saying that I am going to observe what kind of declaration and what kind of move we are going to receive from the part of the Bouteflika side.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Merci, docteur. This was very helpful.
Welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Dr. Dalia Ghanem. That was very helpful. And yeah, as I mentioned at the outset, it really does, I think, provide the context for understanding events as they unfold. As Algeria goes, so goes the region potentially. Very interesting stuff. Also, one quick plug, request, ask. Please leave a review of the show on iTunes. It's a great way of spreading the word of the show. The more reviews the show gets on iTunes, the more likely Apple is to recommend the show to people who are interested in foreign policy podcasts. So please leave your review. You'd be helping spread the word about the show. Thank you. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.